21st of November. The 21st of November, 2022. I'm Dana Durnford. I'm also known as the nuclearproctologist.org. You can call in at 709-589-4406. Hope everybody's doing good. Hump day for me, each Tuesday we start our shows on Sunday, so got a huge, wonderful show about crazy nuclear industry tonight for everybody. There's such thing as a wonderful show. What are we going to do about the IAEA? We've had polls, should they be arrested and ejected into the sun, and it was almost 100% yes. Atoms for Humanity, the A-10 Warthog, and many aircraft and certainly tanks. Well, A-10 in particular only shoots dirty bombs. Dirty bombs, each shell, 12-inch shell, is a dirty bomb, depleted uranium, formerly known as DOLRAM, depleted uranium, low-level radioactive material. Pin the tail on the fuel pool. I can't find the fuel pool. I've been looking for 11 years. I can't find a friggin' thing. There is no fuel pool. That's in the wrong spot. Powerful explosion rocks Ukraine's nuclear power plant. Zaporizhzhia. That's my version of it. I've heard many countries pronounce it many different ways. I couldn't care less. I'm not from Ukraine, and I'm not going to try to perfect the language that caused inflation worldwide. Powerful explosion rocks when there's 60 other wars going on at the same time. What made Ukraine so important that we destroyed everybody worldwide with inflation, I wonder? Bless their hearts, and they should have surrendered right away, and they wouldn't be in. The whole country will get flattened, just like Afghanistan and Iraq and Syria and everywhere else that this industry looks at. So, how many times? I've lost count, 20 times or something. They've lost power, external power. They run on external gas, oil, and coal plants, right? They don't run on nuclear, these big disease factories known as nuclear power. Well, it's every second day, basically, for quite a while. But there's been at least 20 times where they lost external power, had to revert to the on-site diesels. These diesels are typically hard to start. Nuclear power has one last chance to flourish in the United States. So nuclear is on its last leg. We got a poll tonight. Are dirty nuclear power plants, also known as disease factories, because they're hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools constantly. The fuel pools are still split in the same atoms they would for the power tens of millions of homes, because the fuel pool has a lot of reactor cores in it, right? Each core can power 1 million homes. It's still split in the same atoms. Probably why they're surrounded by farms, isn't it, Dana? That's right. Our dirty, despicable, disgusting, sadistic nuclear power plants that are also known as disease factors, because there's 1,800 diseases from radiation, not just cancer, killing the Earth's species and humanity's future. Well, duh. Well, unfortunately, we've done the research expeditions, and you can see them at the nuclearproctologist.org. Once again, we are on the cusp of a nuclear renaissance. You don't got the manpower, for starters. France got half their fleet online. They were one of the big companies, right? EDF. Westinghouse just sold to Brookfield. which is not a nuclear agency. And they got a little reactor in Poland they're going to build because Poland is part of NATO. Actually realizing and small modular reactors is simply a fantasy. It's meant to distract you from any solutions, actually, is all we can tell. There's no actual small reactors. They've been talking about it for 50 years. They build the big ones because of economy of scale. Actually realizing one requires something nuclear power isn't known for: speed. Nuclear power produces carbon-free... Now, I got a problem with that carbon-free power since 2015. We've been listening to this fable. All nuclear power plants have to run on at least 2 dedicated coal, gas, and oil plants. So to call them carbon-free is is a bald-faced lie. It's a blatant, hideous, monstrous lie. It's a complete misrepresentation on purpose to manipulate you. So the media, you should sue the media every time they say that. Nuclear plants produce carbon-free power. Oh yeah, and it gets rid of all the homeless. This is all the nuclear scientists. I'm sorry. This is all the heroes, the homeless, the destitute, the victims of society, the immigrants who don't speak the language. There's no nuclear scientists ever went to a nuclear meltdown like Japan's. Here's the shoe bomber, and there's the human bomber. It's a disgusting parasite. So they're the type of people, the guy in the yellow, because he's yellow as they come, from the United Kingdom, he's going to tell you that it's like a rocks. The radiation from a nuclear meltdown is like bananas and potato chips and walking in sunshine. But it's not. It's got nothing to do with that. Just getting close to these ships, let alone on these ships, the Geiger counter is terrifying. They spent 3 decades straight. Now, they've been at it ever since, right? Once they stopped dumping it into the ocean, they built pipelines from every single reactor directly into the ocean and just dumps it that way. And incinerators at every nuclear site. Every nuclear power plant has incinerators and a limit of what they're allowed to burn per kilogram. This is an absurd, incredibly absurd practice. Decades of dumping it into the ocean. Those barrels will sink down, and time to get down a couple of 100 feet, they'll implode. It's evil on a whole different scale. United Kingdom done it non-stop. Took all their heavy waste, brutal waste, out on ships every day for 3 decades, for 30 years, and dumped it in the ocean. Nuclear power is carbon-free, except that it's not. So 30 million tons of radioactive waste that they picked up in Japan. And that was 2015, by the way. In 2015. In 2022...
There's about 60 million tons of contaminated soil that's being stored, planned to be stored, outside the Fukushima Daiichi perimeter fence.
So he's saying 60 million, they're saying 30 million in 2015. That was only 3% of the land in a single prefecture. Remember, the food was banned from 14 prefectures by 55 countries. Not Canada. Canada lifted all restrictions after 93 days. Doesn't rely on fossil fuel. Well, nuclear relies on fossil fuel. It has 2 external gas, oil, and coal plants just to work. That's just one of the many, many ways. You got to build it. You think those things are not using fossil fuels? You think to dig a hole like that doesn't take an absurd amount of fossil fuel? They're like 4 gallons to the mile. or whatever it is. This whole process of just getting the iron ore and turning it into yellow cake is absurd. To call it carbon-free should be a crime, and it should be a serious crime because, you can't drink the water in these communities because of a uranium mine, for instance. That's like that around the world, wherever uranium mines are, they destroy everything. Children with 11 becquerels a kilogram start to see heart problems. This is a study from Chernobyl. And 3 million children require treatment after Chernobyl. 3 million children. Some of these helicopters were only used once. If you're so radioactive, you can't use it again. So to call it carbon-free is the opposite. Everything else is carbon-free compared to nuclear. Nuclear is the only one that will cause you to run away and leave your communities behind. Is that carbon-free, to leave all your schools and universities and all the homes and infrastructure and community after community? And if you do move people back, then you're murdering them in increments over time with up to 1,800 illnesses. So to call it carbon-free is an absurd, it's an insult. They're attacking you and your loved ones. So carbon-free had 50,000 missile silos. Each one of these dots are missile silos. So they were using all of these communities as human shields. What did it take for nuclear to build all of these? Now these are bunkers. These are absurd amounts of cement. The whole story about calling something carbon-free can run at high capacity. These are disease factories. See the small stacks? There's 2 of them back there. They're hemorrhaging radiation from the fuel pools every day into the environment, and these places are almost every single one of them is surrounded by farms. The thing about Fukushima was they're still telling the lie with a movie, right? Fukushima 50. The Fukushima 50 is who they claim is hiding behind the tarp. They didn't want the reporters to ask them any questions. You just want to work at Fukushima, right? Because they're stoic, Dana. Well, actually, they're dressed exactly the same as the other people in their paper suits, where they burn 7,000 of these paper suits each day, according to TEPCO. You don't need a tarp. They're all dressed the same. You can't tell anybody from anybody else. This was meant to end the conversation about interviewing people at the plant. And it did. That was the end of it right there. Hence, in these troubled, climate-conscious times, the renewed interest. Well, imagine this is a plume model of Fukushima radioactive fallout from NOAA based on 40 days. Think of a snowstorm. Think if that was a snowstorm over 40 days, covering the whole planet with snow that didn't melt forever, for 1 million years. It snowed every day. Because that's what nuclear is. All the fuel pools means it's snowing every day. By the way, the model is just based on venting. It's not based on the actual meltdown. But it's actually a cloud of energy that you can't perceive. You can't see it or taste it or hear it or feel it or touch it or pick it up or anything else. But it's very dangerous, and it's very dangerous for millions of years. Pulsing energy every second, covering the whole planet for about 80 years, and they're always adding to it. And this was the camel that broke the planet's back, Fukushima was. After 80 years, this was overload. The planet was already on life support. As it is, the U.S. hosts the world's largest fleet of generating 18% of the country's electricity. That's very debatable, by the way, because you have a lot of reactors shut down, so they're ramping up the other reactors that are already brittle and suffering from age and the Wigner effect, which is like the brittleness. You're talking about pressurized reactors. having something brittle at 1,000 psi's, 2,000 psi's, a pretty stupid thing to do, and which is the nuclear industry. And almost half of it is zero carbon electricity. So they're saying half of America's zero carbon electricity that I ran through earlier and show you that is simply not carbon free. And the carbon free has been weaponized, the words carbon free, for the nuclear industry to try to put it on a pedestal in desperation. This plume model here, where I'm pointing, is the 19 days, 468 hours later, 19 days later, the radioactive plume covering the planet. So you had NOAA covering the planet in 40 days. You had the Norwegian Institute for Air Research covering the planet in 19 days. And with an average age of 36 years, is 6 years past their lifespan because they become brittle from the neutron bombardment, the X-rays, the gamma shines. The whole site, 90% of the site, is bombarded with neutrons to the point where they got to put it in a nuclear waste dump, which means it's not a safe site. And this is why the original charters for nuclear power plants was 30 years, not 40, not 50, like the savages, cowards in the media are now claiming over the last couple of years, but actually 30 years was the original charters. And he said not a single isotope will make it off the site. Once you open up the fuel, the reactor core and change the fuel, you take that fuel out after 18 months and put it in a pool, it's hemorrhage and radiation for millions of years by splitting the atoms. It's so unconscionably evil. It's impossible all the nuclear academics and scientists and universities don't know. It's impossible the regulatory agencies don't know. It's impossible the IAEA doesn't know the significance. It's impossible. Which leaves us with the fact that they're actually monstrously evil, insidiously evil, and hatefully evil, where they condemned all species to a horrible future from the releases. It's over 1,000 fuel pools worldwide hemorrhaging. When I say the word hemorrhaging, that doesn't do it justice. Each fuel pool, and there's 1,000 of them, each one is boiling off 120,000 liters a day, 120 tons of water a day from the fuel pools have to be replaced. Special water, by the way. Expensive water, by the way. Demineralized water, by the way. Very expensive and borated water to stop a chain reaction from taking place in the pool. Once it is still splitting the atoms are soaked up in the water. Each liter is trillions of atoms. That's boiled off. 120,000 liters a day are boiled off into the communities. There's 1,000 fuel pools worldwide doing it. Every one of them are surrounded by farms. But that stuff covers the whole planet. It's enough to kill every species. If we shut it all off now, it's still enough to kill every species on the planet in the future from the bioaccumulation. It's a monstrous, hideous, evil industry. There's no redeeming qualities whatsoever. Moreover, nuclear power's attributes of zero emissions. Again, the fuel pools are always hemorrhaging, producing plumes covering the entire planet. Pulsing energy every second. That's global warming. Whether you want to accept it or not, you can pretend all you want that I'm wrong, but I provide the documentation. Show me the documentation that I'm wrong. In fact, nobody out there will mention my name because they can't have a real conversation, right? They can't have an honest conversation. And so if their supporters find my videos, the game is over. If their children or their parents or their wives or their significant others find my videos, the gig's up for them. They know that. All of a sudden, their children won't want nothing to do with them ever again, realize they're actually monsters. And they are. They live in denial, the majority of them, right? But these are actual monsters, real-life monsters. That's the only way you can describe the nuclear industry. Our dirty, despicable, disgusting, revolting nuclear power plants, also known as 1800 disease factories, killing the Earth's species and humanity's future. And yes, that's a big, shiny wow, yes. Hang on. The only problem in my life is nothing is easy telling this story. I'm just going to show you 6 pictures from expeditions that I carried out from Vancouver, British Columbia at some point. So to your right is a map from Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, all the way up to the green, Prince Rupert. Just above that is Alaska. I repeated that year after year for 4 to 5 months at a time. For many years just in this little boat, and also with a sailboat. The species to your left are permanently exterminated. That's an extinction event. And so the color is what stands out, right? Now the pictures to the right I went and took. And I repeated it year after year. The species didn't come back. The diversity was really spectacular. It's hard to appreciate it, but it was impossible to go from low tide to high tide without slipping, because every square millimeter was jostling with life. Now it's a total barren wasteland. So when the birds would fly along the coastline, if they couldn't find their migratory species or went into the coastline, there was still tons of food. And there was also 6,500 invertebrates without the backbones. And there were 700 algae in the tidal zone, right? And so there were 6,500 known invertebrates with the backbones like little shrimp, right? But there was 10,000 other species that weren't documented in that tide pool. So the radioactive fallout was 450,000 times above detection levels after Fukushima. So they call it zero emission when it had 450,000 times just the xenon, which will burn a hole through the lungs of the insects and birds and mammals and animals and humans and sequester in their bones and destroy their ability to make stem cells, particularly the children and the young species. And so when you see a number that says like that, it means it was saturated. And this model is based on 16 days from France. It means it was sort of saturated with uranium, plutonium, curium isotopes, the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rod, not cesium. 16-day model covering the entire planet based on venting, where 680 kilometers of coastline was washed away. There was no telephone poles or anything else, and including the site was completely the tsunami ran through that site at 700 kilometers an hour. There was no venting. Nobody was venting. When the tsunami ran through it, that was the end of that. And when they talk about venting, this is a despicable fable that is perpetrated so that you can't have a future. Nuclear sacrificed every species and humanity's future and is doing it again with the fabled small modular reactors that don't even exist. Memorandums of understanding worldwide coming in for something that don't exist. And so that way they don't look at anything else. They don't consider geothermal, which wasn't even mentioned at the Constipated Party 27 United Nations. Nuclear had its own pavilion, for goodness sakes. Largely went unrewarded, saying that it has zero emissions, so when I'm rewarded, this is absurdness. Gas prices hit the highest levels in 14 years because NATO and United Nations countries, which is United Nations, 195 militaries, not the people in the country had no say. They were told by the New World Order, according to George Bush, and the military-industrial complex, according to Eisenhower, that's who the United Nations actually is, right? They were at this before Japan. They were called the League of Nations. And these are just a bunch of gang countries wrecking everybody else with the biggest misery machine on the planet, the military-industrial complex, the weapons production facilities, once they infiltrate your universities, it's all over. They buy up your medias, and then they weaponize these venues against the population. And the only industry that's important is war. If you go look at all the studies, there's 4.3 million produced every year in North America. If you had a ticker tape, you would see the majority of them are for the military-industrial complex or connected in some way. And so taxpayers pay for that. Try wrapping your mind around that. 4.3 million academic studies each year in North America. And taxpayers pay for it. And the universities are asking the military what they want them to do next. The inflation, now they threw everything at the nuclear industry to try to keep it afloat, even despite the fact it's an extinction event from Japan and the fuel pools worldwide. The Inflation Reduction Act took the nationwide with a federal tax credit where they got 30% kickbacks for, if you spend $100 in the nuclear industry now, Canada's doing the same thing, by the way, they get $30 back, but there's way more than that's going on. It's like $50 back for every 100 they spend. And they don't got to wait to get it back very long. There's even a bonus tax credit for green hydrogen, which existing nuclear plants can potentially use surplus power or heat to produce. They just gave them like 10 ways to stay afloat, but they still can't do it because the people that, the shakers and movers are the inbreeds. They're incapable of doing anything. Like, the original generation in the 60s and 70s that created all this stuff, after that, the Renaissance was over, and it was just maintenance. And these people married within the industry, the degenerate nuclear industry, and their children were allocated bursaries from the nuclear industry at birth for an education to get back into the industry to cover up the sins of their parents and grandparents and great-grandparents. And so the current generation is the entitled lot. They're completely disenfranchised from any concept of what reality is. And that goes triple for the professors at the nuclear institutions, universities worldwide. It's a complete disconnect of humanity. They don't even know what the word humanity actually means. They're incapable of it because of the inbreeding has breeded it out of them. All of this represents a windfall for a set of assets that are by definition scarce. Little wonder that Constellation Energy, which has showed up every day for a week now, the merchant nuclear arm Exelon Corp has more than doubled in value, and they shouldn't be allowed to put nuclear on the stock market. That's absurd, by the way. That's evil. The last reactor is like putting crack cocaine on the stock market, see? The last reactor came online in 2016. Not only was it the first in 20 years, which is what's spare, obviously, it took 43 years, not 40 years. It took 43 years for what's spare, and they had to replace, in less than a couple of years after they fired it up, they had to replace a whole lot of components because they were 43 years old. 43 years to get it to run. They never gave up hope a single time. Nuclear industry had all the money and all the energy and all the opportunities thrown at them, and they pissed on it, threw gas on it, and set it on fire every time. This is the second most challenging side of the Renaissance. It doesn't exist. Reviving the lost art of building new plants in the U.S. Last year was 0.4 gigawatts of nuclear and 291 gigawatts of renewables. That's as dying as it gets. Nuclear power's fall from grace is traced to the 3 Mile Island accident. In 1959, Santa Susana melted down, still melting down. It released the equivalent of 460 3 Mile Islands worth of radiation into the environment. And they admit that 3 Mile Island contaminated 2 million people, and then claimed it was equally watching color television for an extra year. There was a professor, or not a professor, but a man in Pennsylvania who sued 3 Mile Island, got money to do studies, and showed this.
Here's the 3 Mile Island, Susquehanna River, Harrisburg up here. So these are the estimates from the dosimetrists under the funding with the court order that I showed previously.
This is cancer clusters from the radioactive plumes from 3 Mile Islands. And we got the documentation showing people left their pets behind. Lots of them died pretty quickly or before they got back home. And that the governor of Pennsylvania at the time refused to evacuate the people because didn't want to cause a panic. Which was Thornton, was it? I can't remember. I got it there somewhere. Hang on. Yeah, there it is. Let me see if I can find the part I want to show you. Dick, I said Bob, did I? Thurnberg. I said Thornton or something. Who freaking knows? The guy with the black glasses. He knew nothing about nuclear energy. An evacuation carrying inherent risk to life and limb of the potential evacuees is increasing the already intense public anxiety. Is why he didn't evacuate people. He didn't want people to have anxiety. It's better to suck up radiation, get sick, and die. For up to 1,800 illnesses. He refused to issue evacuation orders, which could have created a panic. Which is why we have now, since then, typically 100 sirens within 10 miles of a nuclear power plant, so you can panic. By the way, that's the same excuse they gave from Fukushima. The people who do that should get the death penalty. These are terrorists. Just building this in your community is an act of terrorism, by the way, because once you put fuel in the pool, it's all over for your loved ones. Your children will guaranteed never have a normal life. Anything within 500 miles is guaranteed to be infected with the atomic plague. And if you stay there, it bioaccumulates. On the third day of the crisis, he did recommend pregnant women and children within 5 miles leave the area because he didn't want statistics to show up in 10 years. This is why you got sirens, because you're supposed to evacuate immediately the opposite way of where the wind's going to blow all the material to. You might not have no time, see? But if you stay there, you're going to be the absurd pollution, which is what they done in Fukushima originally. An excessive zeal from regulators. For Santa Susana and other nuclear test sites in that area.
Dan, I just remembered how many people filed claims. We have 3,800 workers who have filed claims for cancer.
And how many do you think have gotten the claims?
Only 1/3 have been paid so
About
far.
1,000 then.
Out of 3,800.
Idaho National Laboratory had 900 people approved for cancer disabilities. Cancer is just one of 1,800 illnesses, by the way. Another 900 were rejected. And hundreds more got sick and died, didn't know why. Almost everybody at Idaho National Laboratories and these other national laboratories got up to 1,800 illnesses. Brookhaven, it was an absurd amount of people. Nuclear power was struggling already, and many projects have been cancelled before 1979, part because it was already taken a decade to plan, license, and construct. 3 Mile Island, more than doubling in real terms between 71 and 78, flouted the conventional wisdom of greater scale leading to efficiencies. Well, 3 Mile Island, right? The nuclear renaissance should have ended in 1955 with Chalk River, the first reactor that melted down. It certainly should have ended with Santa Susana. Santa Susana had multiple reactors with no containments, the same as Hanford and Argonne National Laboratories. And quite a few of these sites, the original reactors in the 50s and 60s had no containments. Radiation was pumped into the environment non-stop. It's so hideous, it's hard to imagine they actually done that. But that was uniform through all countries were doing this. Well, it doesn't matter because we're going to have a nuclear war and humanity will die, so who cares about the containment? Just make the plutonium, make as many bombs as you can that you can't use. What a disgusting legacy nuclear has. What a despicable, monstrous, hideous, vicious. Yeah, James Luce is there in the comments section saying how Hershey didn't stop producing chocolates, even today there, right in the fallout zone. Oh, it's okay. Yeah, bring in that food from the Susquehanna area. It's terrifying, isn't it? Hi, everybody. How's the poll going tonight? Got a poll, got a big poll, with a poll, 1 poll, 2 poll. Everybody got a poll. Our dirty, despicable, disgusting, horrific nuclear power plants, also known as disease factories, because there's 1,800 diseases from radiation poisoning, killing the Earth's species and humanity. Well, the research expeditions that I done says, hell yeah, we covered Vancouver to Alaska for 6 years, multiple times some years. All those species were exterminated after Fukushima. It's a complete extermination. Do they matter? Or is nuclear more important? The first oil shock in 1973 initially sparked a nuclear euphoria. Nixon, the U.S. president, degenerate, Project Independence called for building 1,000 nuclear power plants, disease factories. And he peaked at 112. The oil shock slammed the brakes on economic expansions, kick-started energy conservation, and annual growth. Electricity consumption slowed to 3.2 between 73 and 78. And 2.5% from there to 2000, and just 0.5% since. So economic growth is basically flatlined. Right? Wow. That's extremely, well, except for the military-industrial complex and the weapons production. Saddling ratepayers with billions in costs for abandoned, half-built disease factories. The same thing happened as recently as 2017. the abandonment of 2 unfinished projects in South Carolina. 2 other new reactors have actually been built in Georgia, due to switch on next year, but they're far from being good public relations. Massively over budget, massively delayed, and Westinghouse and a couple of big companies went bankrupt. They owe their completion to regulators, offloading much of the costs onto the people that were going to use electricity. I mean, it's all paid for by the people who buy the electricity anyway. But the people that goes in charge of it, they're under enormous amount of pressure to get rid of everything and get more nuclear. And it's been like that since the 60s. As much as climate change bolsters the case for disease factors known as nuclear power, it has also bolstered alternatives, not just renewables and batteries. Not just renewables and batteries. Why would you talk about batteries when you're talking about storage? Like if you use geothermal, there's a company that can replace gas, oil, coal, nuclear plants with geothermal and then pull out the gas, oil, coal, and nuclear commodity facilities and switch on the renewable geothermal. Could work on nearly every coal and gas power plant on the planet. If it can do that, it can work on oil, coal, and nuclear too. Because they send out electricity the same way, right? This is why the current renaissance centers on developing small modular reactors, not geothermal. Because geothermal is obviously the best one. Why wouldn't you do geothermal where you drill down, you tap into 1,000-degree temperatures, you just boil your water? It's brilliant. You don't have to bring in shiploads of coal and gas and oil constantly. It's just plug and play. Disgusting companies like NuScale, which is like 20 years old, by the way, still hasn't built a small modular reactor and no hope in the future. And TerraPower, founded by Bill Gates, who's never been there. They're just using Bill Gates because they don't have anybody in the nuclear industry that people know. There's nobody in the nuclear industry that the world is like, that's pretty cool, guy or girl. They have nobody. You got to be a vicious scum to work in the nuclear industry at that capacity. And so they're piggybacking off Bill Gates and Elon Musk's name because they don't have a name of their own. They just have a legacy of evil. Aim to deploy initial commercial projects in late 2020s. Well, first off, they don't even have the NRC has passed the design, but it's missing around 1,000 pages. So it's not really an active design. But if you use the geothermal, so why would you use that rather than geothermal? And geothermal can be paired up with water batteries. We got 2 reservoirs and you pump water up to the top one with excess energy and release it down. And pumped hydro, compressed air storage rather, is just compressors where you dig mine shafts, 120 psi, and the compression of it, you take that heat, you can store it with salt for several weeks. So when you got a doldrum, you can unpack the compressed air with the heat that you already salvaged. This is stupid, simple technologies, off the shelf, obsolete. Despite being talked about for years, small modular reactors haven't arrived. For 50 years. For 50 years. There are no good cost estimates because no one's actually built one. They actually don't exist. And they won't operate for several more years. Several more decades. Commercialization of scale is probably at least a decade away. A decade! This is absurdness to suggest you're going to have production of these types of reactors in a decade. It's a complete fable. There is no documentation. Worldwide, there's just one reactor that's been approved, designed. It's missing over 1,000 papers to explain the rest of it. They just rubber stamped it to try to get this renaissance in the second year. Nuclear Regulatory Agency doesn't even exist. They can bring in a piece of wood with a hole through it and call that the nuclear reactor, and they'll take the rubber stamp and stamp it. They won't dare argue with anybody. Their job is not. Their job is to promote the disease factory everywhere worldwide, I notice now. What will the cost of competing technologies be by then? Well, geothermal happen to exist already. There's quite a few plants worldwide. And if you took the technology and went after it to replace gas, oil, coal, and nuclear, and took the universities, the schools of mass destruction currently, and converted them into something good, got the kinks out of it, you can implement this worldwide in about 10 years. You don't even need the will, you just got to go ahead and do it. Typically, talk of nuclear power revives amid a perceived crisis because of oil shocks or conflicts. That's a really interesting statement. So the only time nuclear has a renaissance is in times of oil shock or conflict. And this is 100% public relation firms talking about. There's over 1,000 public relation firms whose job is to counter someone like me. Unfortunately, they don't got anybody to pick on, except for me. I'm the only person doing an actual educational program in history. So everything is taking a giant shit on me over the last decade. That's part of the job, is you got to be shit on constantly by scumbag cowards. And I'm not a coward. I don't hide away from anybody. Ever. And I don't lie. I provide the documentation for everything, all of my assertions. We're in a moment where all the stars have seemingly aligned: climate urgency, energy security caused by 195 countries putting an embargo against the commodity country they can't replace, which is Russia. Literally the stupidest thing you could ever do was put embargoes against a country where you get all your energy from, which was Russia. And then instant inflation worldwide, which has destroyed 8 million people's future. Except for Russia. Russia just sold to somebody else. The only people that didn't get hurt was Russia. And Klaus Schwab. With our grids undergoing fundamental change, net zero targets bearing down on us from a propaganda machine. If this purported renaissance doesn't flourish, it's unlikely to be another. And that's what we've been talking about for quite a few months now, is this. We're seeing this desperation and this ramping up of propaganda with the nuclear industry to promote something that can't exist anymore. Its time has come and gone. And everything out there is old and decrepit in the industry. If this purported renaissance, nuclear renaissance, doesn't flourish now, there is unlikely to be another. That was Bloomberg. Like geothermal, if you want a solution, is right there, ready to, it's very stupid, simple to do. Most of the world, you only got to go down around 1,000 feet, for goodness sakes. There's tons of them worldwide, but they're suppressed because as soon as you start looking at technology, you realize how stupid nuclear is. This is absurd story. China, scumbag, degenerate, piece of shit nuclear industry in China supports the IAEA, the degenerate IAEA review of Fukushima treatment. Fukushima treatment. Anyway, they're talking about, they're claiming they got 1,000 tanks. I counted the tanks, there were 750. So when you look at this picture, for instance, right, the tanks are just, that's not a good picture, hang on. There you go. Let me show you how this actually works. See, the tanks start here, and there's just this little section, right? See that? And there's little tanks right there, and I included them. I got 750. There's no tanks over here. That's reactors 6, 5, and 6, by the way, right there. That's the dry cask storage. So all kinds of dry cask containers got washed out into the Pacific. Because the way it's built there, I'll get another picture of it coming up in a bit. Fukushima treatment. Fukushima water treatment. So what they're claiming is they're pouring water over the melted reactors, then they're sucking it up and putting it in the tanks. This is 100% fable, complete fable. First off, if you did do something like that, like the water for the tanks originally was they were drilling a hole here, drill a hole there, and they would pump up water and they would send it to the laboratory to see how radioactive was to get an idea of how much was running into the ocean. Now they're claiming they're pumping it all from the reactors themselves and putting it in the tanks. Now they had 1,000 tanks in 2013. And 1,200 tanks in 2014, 900 tanks in 2017, and 1,000 tanks in 2022. So in 9 years, they've never filled up a single tank. They're claiming, and this is the claim that nothing is going into the ocean. See, and they got every media and university on the planet willing to tell the same lie. So it's very convincing because Dana, all the media and the universities are not going to lie, Dana. And over the years, I used to hear that. I don't hear it anymore because the truth is easy. I'll just show you these 3 pictures of Fukushima. Just kind of wrap your mind around it. So they're saying they're sucking up water from the basement of these reactors and claiming the fuel pools are intact. They're claiming that it doesn't look like that, and reactor 3 doesn't look like that. So reactor 4, the fuel pools will be at the top of the building with the reactor core, and it doesn't exist. And it's the same thing with reactor 3. So that's just 2 of the 4 reactors. They're claiming that they are intact. This is just one of the many, many medias.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, leading to the country's worst nuclear disaster.
Yeah, that was me walking into the bottom corner. So she's claiming that she's above the fuel pool looking down and that they're getting fuel from the pool that doesn't exist. And they're claiming that the water from the buildings is being sucked up and put in these tanks, and therefore the ocean is not being harmed. And we're in real trouble, as you've seen pictures from my expeditions. You can deny the significance of that all you want, but that's all you're doing. This was a model from Germany. This was a model from NOAA that they hid away. It was leaked online, this one here. This is the one they showed you. If you look up the Pacific Ocean Fukushima contamination, you're going to find that constantly. And then they come out and say, well, that's a fake map. That's from the tsunami, so there is no danger to the Pacific. That was the game from the start. See? The universities have been down this road before, and that was the game, and they played it really, really well. And convinced a large percentage of the population early on there was no harm, the people were just fear-mongering. But this was NOAA's model of the radioactive fallout. This German model of the radioactive fallout came from, they said,
maybe worse than thought. Studies from last year indicate that radioactive water will contaminate the entire Pacific Ocean in just 6 years. Kim Min-ji reports.
This graphic shows the gradual contamination of the Pacific Ocean due to leaks of radioactive water from the crippled Fukushima nuclear plant in Japan. The simulation, which was run by a German marine research institute, shows the entire Pacific waters being polluted by radioactive water in just 6 years.
Just 6 years. But the reality of it was the airborne plume covered the planet in just a couple of weeks. Let me see if I find a better model. Not a better model, I guess, but another model. Here's a model, there's a model, everywhere is a model. I'm not sure if this was plutonium or americium. Bear with me. I brought the wrong one. This was TEPCO's model of Neptunium-239, which decays to plutonium. So, in this part of that picture, to your bottom right-hand corner, is reactor 5 and 6, something you probably never heard about very much. Just notice that big drums, how that got twisted, how much power actually went through this site. This was the dry cast facility, and that's at ground level, ocean level. So the tsunami ran right through this and back out again into the ocean. But reactor 5 and 6 up in the corner, this was a drone pictures they released to 2020, 10th anniversary. And there were 36 pictures released, and China ran the story. And when I translated the story, I wasn't able to wrap my mind around what was going on. And I seen all these download links, so I started downloading 760 pictures. But these were drones from far up. When I zoomed in, everything was pixelated except for reactor 5. But that's the pump house, that's reactor 6, and behind it over there is the stack they used to expel radiation from the fuel pools and incinerators at the other side of the site. It has a similar one for it. But all fuel pools have those tall, skinny stacks that are really tall, so the radiation falls off site. Why is reactor 6 pixelated? And so, why didn't anybody else cover those pictures worldwide? And China ran a short story in Chinese and with the links to the picture. And when I downloaded the pictures, I was like, well, this is pretty shitty because it was from a drone and very high quality. I said, well, I'll zoom in, and all the reactors were pixelated, and the common spent fuel pool. And the common spent fuel pool. Just bring in another picture of that from the other side of the site. So the front of this reactor 3, but everything behind it was pixelated. And so was the common spent fuel pool. This is the common spent fuel pool behind reactor 4. There are transport truck containers up there at the top of the picture to give you the context of design. Limitless nuclear fusion energy is another step closer to reality thanks to burning plasma. Again, the fusion industry, 50 years or something like this at this technology, and fusion is the sun. Now, the sun is 1,000,000 times the size of Earth. That's why it works, see? They want to put it in a bottle and make it work, and that'll solve everybody's problem. And there's so many problems with that story. It makes, why would you... Obviously, the industry controls the universities and the medias, right? And they captured that a long time ago. And so anything nuclear they're going to be promoting with your, rather than you have any kind of a future with all the... So why would you use it instead of geothermal, which exists? If you put the same effort as you're putting into this bizarre fusion, fusion works because the sun can expel its issues millions of miles into space and across the universe, right? But we need to be able to do that to make it actually work. 150 million degrees just to get it to fart a couple times. So why wouldn't you use geothermal? It can replace everything that's already here. Why are you putting all this research from all these corporations worldwide into fusion and the small modular reactors, and you haven't got a single university working on geothermal? Which should be you should be using geothermal instead of wind and solar. Wind and solar may be backup, but geothermal is perfect, same as tidal energy, but geothermal is better. Because it's just water. There's not many moving parts below ground, right? Macron Jr. pushes for nuclear renewable energy hails. Renewable, they're calling nuclear in the Philippines renewables. This is a reactor they finished in 1986 and Chernobyl happened, so they scuttled it. They're still trying to get that up and running. But this is a earthquake zone in the Philippines. They have absurd amount of earthquakes, right? They have an absurd amount. On land, horrific earthquakes and tsunamis. And they have cyclones or typhoons that are coming ashore at 250 sustained miles per hour and are 900 kilometers wide. Why would you talk about putting nuclear in that environment? Unless you're begging for another meltdown. But the Philippines is obviously the worst spot you can do it. Limitless nuclear fusion energy is another step closer to reality. Well, at first they said that, 2 years ago they came out with a big story. All the media ran with it. Oh my goodness, we got more energy than we put in. Well, how much did you get back from it? Well, we got more than we put into it. And there's 150 million degree Fahrenheit temperatures is what they're putting into it. It's the same amount of energy as a city to make that work. And they got enough energy back to power a 9-volt light bulb. The static would probably power a 120 light bulb, by the way, from that kind of residual energy, right? The industry is insane. So 150, they got, I don't know what it is, 190 lasers or something to create, and then everything's held apart by magnets because if it touches anything, it blows up. At these temperatures, they're claiming that it can't melt down. But if you heat anything sustained to 150 million degrees, something goes wrong. 150 million degrees is that's a detonation, right? You're talking some serious power, serious energy. France's failure to fix nuclear power plants poses huge risk to United Kingdom. Because United Kingdom refused to replace nuclear over the last 10, 20 years. And they kept saying, well, we got nothing else, so we got to give nuclear an extension. You see that worldwide now. Well, why didn't you build replacements? Well, we didn't, so we can't shut it off because we got nothing to replace it with. Like Diablo Canyon, right? That's their scam they've been doing for quite a while, by the way. But now they got themselves into a box because France had a catastrophic year where they realized the Wigner effect, the neutron bombardment, the gamma shines, the X-rays, have finally made everything so brittle they got to take it apart and replace it in order to try to use it again for a few more years. But right, they're not willing to admit because they don't have anything to replace it. Now they're claiming for a nuclear renaissance, they don't have the manpower. Manpower that they do have is tied up in trying to repair 26 reactors that are offline. Because the government built it, so you know that was going to go south at some point, right? Electricité de France, which is EDF, is struggling to come up with a plan to restart a quarter of its nuclear plants by December. Well, that pipe dream is long gone, isn't it? 25 of EDF's 56 reactors were offline. They're not very honest, so there's probably 6 more. So I know the EDF's teams are extremely mobilized. And of course, Marcos in the Philippines is going to get France to help build them a reactor when they can't even take care of their own reactors. They don't have the manpower on top of that. Right, that skill of building reactors disappeared in the 70s and 80s when the nuclear... Because 3 Mile Island was the end of the nuclear so-called renaissance in the United States. Just like Chernobyl was the end of the nuclear renaissance worldwide. And they've been struggling for another renaissance. They're trying to use, Russia went into Ukraine originally to Chernobyl and captured that. Nuclear industry launched a sustained public relation campaign for 9 months to promote nuclear because nuclear is getting the shit kicked out of it every day in the media because, there's nuclear plants down there without external power repeatedly, and it's accelerating other nuclear plants now. The whole story is this can only end one way, with another massive meltdown that might have already happened. They might have successfully covered it up. Who knows? The N word, which is something you see Japan use a lot. They won't say nuclear plant, they'll say the N plant. A useful omnibus with informed views on nuclear arms and energy. The word nuclear often brings to mind apocalyptic destruction that the world witnessed in Hiroshima. I think Fukushima is more appropriate. While the nuclear taboo has not been breached for the last 77 years, there's over 1,000 fuel pools hemorrhaging radiation into the environment, but people can't perceive it or see it or smell it or taste it. Doesn't mean they're not being permanently harmed and the species are being extinguished. The research expeditions that we've done shows unequivocally, unassailably, that this is an extinction event. So promoting nuclear is the most evilest thing imaginable, when there's so many alternatives on top of that. You can't have a future by trying to pretend this didn't happen. You're not going to have a future. You can only have a future by admitting your mistakes. And the nuclear industry is notorious for refusing to acknowledge even a single human worldwide had died from nuclear. They'll fight that tooth and nail. However, the nuclear domain is also leavened with many positive attributes, really. Vast energy potential represents, which is a byproduct of the fuel, which is a genocide machine, omnicide machine. That's what fuel rods are. They're omnicide machines, constantly splitting the atoms and releasing it into your environment, fission products into your environment. Using the word climate change, greenhouse gas emissions, when the emissions of nuclear power plants is the reason the planet is warming, because the emissions from nuclear pulses energy at the speed of light almost every second. Or almost at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per hour per second, every second. Pure energy. Energy never, you can't destroy energy. Energy never goes away, right? There should be undertaking that any country using or threatening to use nuclear weapons shall face retribution and boycotts from all countries around the world. Well, which means you got to boycott every country with nuclear because they're threatening to use it. That's why they got it. So shut up, morons. The threat of nuclear terrorism, which is a nuclear power plant, is nuclear terrorism. The West fights back against Putin's grip on uranium. Well, there's no moratorium or no sanctions against uranium from... That's a total fabrication headline. They sanctioned the commodities, gas, oil, and coal, but they didn't sanction the fuel. And that the small modular reactor fable is dependent upon the fuel from Russia, which is like a 19% uranium mixed oxide fuel. It's a I can't remember the name of it for some reason. Helium fuel. So they just allocated a lot of money to the degenerate Argonne National Laboratories and other national laboratories to do studies on making enriched fuel from mixed oxide, which is illegal in the United States and Canada. And we got Moltex in Canada trying to change the laws so they can make a few dollars recycling lethal fuel, and the releases from that contaminates everything worldwide constantly. And we've seen this from La Hague in France and Donneray in the United Kingdom and Sellafield in the United Kingdom, and Mayak in Russia. There's so many examples from the reprocessing facilities. That's what they were also doing, of course, at Santa Susana. They were using this high-grade fuel. So Russia has a tight grasp on production because nobody else is doing it. I mean, the West fights back. I just despise the public relation firms each day. Every credible net zero pathway relies on significant growth in nuclear power. No. Like geothermal is perfect. You drill a hole down till you get to 1,000 degrees. You put in your system, then you switch it over from gas, oil, coal, and nuclear to geothermal. Retroactively, you can use every facility on the planet, build your infrastructure, then take the coal, gas, oil, nuclear offline and switch on to geothermal without losing a beat. Energetic debate erupts over nuclear power at Guelph, Ontario, Canada event. Show you power lines. Can nuclear energy meet the climate goals? No, of course not. It is climate change. The emissions are constant from over 1,000 fuel pools worldwide. A company aims to power the world for millions of years with geothermal that can replace all dirty fossil fuel and nuclear plants retroactively. So what? Because on Ontario's been captured, most of Canada's been captured by the nuclear industry, right? And the nuclear industry doesn't, I'll show you, the nuclear industry has no right to exist, particularly in Canada. I'll show it to you in a few seconds here. Can nuclear energy meet climate goals? Of course not. It's absurd to suggest that it has any redeeming qualities for something like that. It's the opposite. Like, you got to realize these plumes, I'm going to show you, this is Fukushima plume based on venting. So imagine 1,000 fuel pools every day that are each boiling off 120,000 liters, and each liter is infinitely more radiation than what they're claiming was in this model for venting. This is a 20-day model from Fukushima of just venting, not the actual meltdowns of 8 fuel pools and 4 reactors. And they're claiming there's only 3 reactors melt down. Well, they were changing the fuel in reactor 4, which meant over half of it was still in the reactor core. And we got the headlines, they had loaded, I can't remember, was it 200 assemblies of new fuel also into reactor 4 the few weeks before the earthquake and tsunami. Breezy Breakfast Radio Hour. Breezy Breakfast. Focus on whether nuclear power should be included in Ontario's energy use. Conversation comes as more communities across the province and around the world talk about aiming for net zero. Well, Canada lifted all restrictions without the world media. Only just a couple of medias reported on it. None of the major medias, none of the TVs reported on it. After 93 days, and 55 countries banned food from 14 prefectures. So Japan couldn't ship it anywhere, only to Canada, who had removed all restrictions after 93 days. And that's why you see the surge of illnesses and diseases, not immune deficiencies and injuries and illnesses throughout Canada over the last decade, because Canada removed everything after 93 friggin' days. Why 55 countries banned it for over a decade, and then people were put in positions of authority in those countries and they slowly removed the restrictions without science, with handshakes from politicians. Our dirty nuclear, despicable, disgusting power plants, also known as disease factories, because there's 1,800 diseases, killing the Earth's species and humanity's future? And the answer is yes. This is unassailable. This is completely unassailable. Bear with me. Let me get done with that. Oh well, don't worry about it. Try one more search. Who knows what I got done with it. Let's keep going here. I can't find what I'm looking for. Principal engineer Can Do Energy, which is the Canadian Reactors, was joining the radio host. I'm assuming this is the radio host. And an associate professor at the University of Waterloo School for the Environment, which is a pretty arrogant thing. If there was a school for environment, they'd be vehemently anti-nuclear, wouldn't they? Started the conversation talking about the nuclear industry, how it can help maintain current energy consumption levels. And Ontario currently uses nuclear power 60% of its mixed energy consumption. Within the industry, there is conversation about developing more small nuclear reactors in the future to meet demand. Now, this is desperation so that their children that are currently going to nuclear schools can have a pension in the future too. Now, how do we get to the level of energy that is needed by societies in general, as well as doing it in a way that has a minimum impact long-term and is sustainable? First off, like, you can't just take two individuals, put them on a radio show and call that evidence without including stuff like geothermal and tidal energy and other alternatives. Geothermal is by far the most sensible. You just drill down, tap into it. Once you got it running, you disconnect gas, oil, coal, and nuclear. There's not an energy debate. In one sense, they might have had one. I didn't hear it, so I don't know. How do we get to the level of energy that is needed by societies, as well as by doing it in a way that is minimum impact long-term and is sustainable? Well, we should leave that up to the scientists, shouldn't we? We're talking about a system, not people from the nuclear industry, that's for sure. We are talking about a system that has a lifetime of about 80 productive years and about 90 operational years. Again, the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into your country and a biosphere. Once you take some fuel out and put it in a pool, and you do this every 18 months. And so each 18 months, there's another million people worth of energy and isotopes being released into the environment every single day that never goes away. It's equivalent, right, in one sense, of having a snowstorm cover the whole planet where it snows constantly and never melts. Except this is radiation. It covers the planet in energy. The energy never stops pulsing, and it never goes away for millions of years. And I mean, this model is only based on 20 days of venting. West Coast hit with 220 million atoms per liter of iodine-129, which is just going to be one of 1,000 different isotopes in that sample. And there's a huge, absurd number with a 15 million year half-life. So 150 million years pulsing energy every second. So that's going to wreck the thyroid glands of all the species in the forests and the woods and the ecosystem, for starters, and children in particular on top of that, where their thyroid glands of all species and humans are going to be producing radioactive hormones. This was sustained. This was a study out of Ottawa, Canada. That wasn't included in the narrative, was it? And sharing a cost comparison analysis of the Ontario electricity options done by Ontario Clean Air Alliance Research. Why are you using them for constantly? Why does you always turn to that particular group who won't even acknowledge Fukushima or Santa Susana? Why are they put on a pedestal? Well, because they're not who they claim to be, are they? They're the controlled opposition from what I'm seeing. Anybody that doesn't acknowledge Fukushima is obviously shouldn't be in the conversation, because that's the most important facet we got on this planet right now is Fukushima nuclear catastrophic extinction level event. The point of nuclear power is listed as one of the most expensive options for producing energy, creating the lowest number of jobs. Jobs got nothing to do with it. Your health, the people who breathe it in, are permanently harmed. When the radiation enters the bodies of the children and humans and species, it sequesters in the muscles and the organs and the bones. The body attacks it for the rest of our lives, and the insects and birds and animals and species and children and everything else, with white blood cells. So it's an instant cause and effect. It's permanent. And that displaces the red blood cells carrying oxygen and nutrition throughout the body, which leaves you lethargic and more susceptible to pathogens and viruses because your immune system is compromised as you bioaccumulate it, because Canada lifted all restrictions on food from the disease factory that is Japan, that disgusting Japan. That was the nuclear industry done that in Canada. And stole $24 billion for their reactors in Ontario for rebuilds immediately after the accident because they were afraid the planet might wake up. Canada restricted scientists for the first couple of years from doing interviews. They had to go through Stephen Harper's office, to the point where scientists didn't understand what was going on. So they were marching in the streets with pots, banging on the pots all over Canada, so that they can get back to a normal world where they can do interviews without getting permission and talking points from Stephen Harper's office, because they didn't want the gig to get out of what Fukushima had done to Canada. It's revolting. You can't have a future with all this pretending, with all these omissions. It's so cowardly. You're not having a conversation when you don't include all the most important facets of the story with the documentation. Just saying, I'm just trying to be realistic. Nuclear energy requires a lot of investments, diverting from the investments in the renewables. It relies heavily on government loans and subsidies like everything else. There's a lot of cash going to the small nuclear reactors that don't exist. The nuclear industry got 1 million excuses of not doing something appropriate. No, we can't use renewables. We got to have more nuclear, carbon-free, Dana. And you're like, They took a different approach in the conversation around nuclear energy, talk about the environment and social drawbacks of replacing fossil fuels by producing batteries for electric vehicles. Well, listen, batteries been around for 130 years, like large-scale productions. We already got a handle on it, and we ignore a lot of the things we could do. We can just change that and recycle it. You can't use that as an argument. That's what you call a straw man argument. You're selling wolf tickets when you bring up topics like that. Certainly we're going to need copper. Yeah, so what? A whole bunch of mining companies can fire up and start producing copper. We got 8 billion people on the planet. We're supposed to stop everything and let everybody perish till you make up your mind? You really think it's not doable? Like, it took a mountain to get a gram of uranium back in the day, but they got better at it eventually, just like you will at copper. Impact on farmers. Every nuclear power plant, except for a couple, is surrounded by farms as far as you can see. Every one of them are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. At what point do we do the right thing? At what point do we call evil evil? At what point? At what point do we say this is not an accident? At what point do we say they're poisoning us? At what point do we say, why are they so evil? What is the threshold for you to come to your senses and say that's enough? We have endless opportunities And look, this is Chalk River, the site of a nuclear meltdown where they buried the reactor on the spot because they're too stupid to contain it or build something else. Do you think all these nuclear power plants surrounded by farms are an accident? You think they're not trying to poison you? Claiming the impacts on farms and the environment is a reason we can't look at other technology, renewable technology, but we should only look at nuclear, which is surrounded by farms. That's not double talk. That's stab you in the face if you look at them. The most idiotic statement imaginable when almost every nuclear power plant, every processing disease factory, mixed oxide fuel facility is surrounded by farms. I'm not going to sit here and sugarcoat a conversation so serious as what's going on. Like, I didn't do year after year after year of research expeditions and say, oh, well, that's all we can do. No, that was the catalyst to go to war. Here's the documentation. Now we got to go to war against this industry. It's going to exterminate us. I don't have an option. I got to do it. I'm not here 5 nights a week working all day every day to make these shows each night because I'm fucking bored. This is desperation because we're going to lose the fucking planet. Where's the line in the sand for you? I know where the line in the sand for me is. I just articulated it. What do you want? Impact on farms and the environment. Now, the fucking arrogance to talk about farms when every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms and say that's why we shouldn't have batteries or electric cars because you're worried about the impact on farms. And I can't say what I want to say because it's illegal. But it should be said about people that lead you down the path of most danger. Going to need a lot of energy to produce the batteries. So we need more nuclear surrounded by farms, do we? What about geothermal, you sack of shit? You incredible, disgusting betrayal, you revolting parasite, whatever creature you actually are. California lawmakers pass help for climate, but not for the bees. Of course. Turning climate into an economic weapon. Right, Michael Schellenberg from Environmental Progress, the disgusting nuclear lobbyist, this is one of his favorite costumes to ship out to the pro-nuclear community. NASA admits the amount of water vapor spewed into the atmosphere from... Remember there was an island a few years ago in the South Pacific Ocean that blasted an enormous plume of water vapors into the atmosphere. Could be enough to temporarily affect the Earth's global climate average temperature. The huge amount of water vapor hurled into the atmosphere detected by degenerate NASA. Except NASA admits that the amount of water vapor spewed into the atmosphere, which is, there's already an ocean up there, by the way, was unprecedented in modern times. It can only mean that its warming was not based on the data or any science, but was purely speculative. Here's Fukushima. A study showing 1 million becquerels of one isotope, 20 million becquerels per liter of another isotope, 220 million becquerels a liter of another isotope covering the planet. Taiwan told people to stay home because of radioactive fallout and get rid of their clothes. South Korea closed 130 schools because of radioactive fallout. And that was a moral and ethical thing to do because irreversible heart damage for children with 50 becquerels a kilogram. So after you stay home, the plume goes by, you should leave that part of your planet and go somewhere else. Because that radiation is never going to go away. And just a tiny amount of it in increments over time will destroy the future of all species and humans. I'm just saying, I'm not trying to be a party pooper, you know. Kerry self-isolated at the Constipated Party, 27. Self-isolated. No, he was getting all kinds of blowback, and he went and hid away, sucked his thumb. U.S. Defense Secretary warns Halifax conference of risk of nuclear proliferation from authoritarian states looking to emulate Russia. You can't emulate Russia. You shit for brains. You fear-mongering. They're going to emulate Russia. You got any idea how big that military-industrial complex is in Russia? How much resources they got at their fingertips? They're going to emulate that. Piece of shit. Even a small nuclear war would mean mass famine. That story is never going to go away, is it? Every day that story comes back and haunts me. That's just the way it is. That's what lawyers do. Because, every 24 hours there's a news cycle. And what we do is look at the 24-hour news cycle. And every day is different media for the most part, telling you the same lies. These are sophisticated lies. They didn't write the story. It's written by the nuclear lobbyists. And then they take it and publish it, and that's how they make their money. That's how they pay their killer journalists, their degenerate journalists, get their paychecks, is through deceit and dishonesty and deception. We've done the research expeditions year after year after year after year, 4 to 5 months at a time. All the species to your left are exterminated in the Pacific coastline, all the way to Mexico to Alaska. I researched 27,000 islands for 6 years, 4 to 5 months a year, in great difficulty, under siege the entire time, attacked viciously, shot at, arrested, and everything else. We still went out and done the research. Very difficult. These are very difficult memories for me because it was a very difficult thing to do. It was a very difficult time, and while I was on the ocean, I couldn't defend myself, and so they viciously attacked my character, and there was no one there to defend me. And then when that research was over, and we went to the Atlantic and discovered the same thing is happening. And I don't expect a typical population, because it happens in increments over many, many years. And so it seems like there never was that many birds. There never was that many bees. There never was that many of these species or those species. It seems natural after a while when they're finally gone. They never really did exist. I heard stories, but there was probably a bunch of drunk people. Smoke and fire would blot out the sun. We had nuclear wars already. It's called nuclear testing. Same bombs, in fact, bigger. It was sustained for decades. France, and the United Kingdom, and America, and India, and Pakistan, and China, and the rest of them. Blown off nuclear weapons for no other reason than to spend money. No legitimate reason. The radioactive fallout was the same. It didn't blot out the sun. Some of these were equal to 3,800 Nagasaki bombs going off at the same time. Didn't block out the sun. This guy here, Dick Smith in Australia, he's claiming that if Australia doesn't use nuclear, the world will perish. It looks like I didn't get the headline for that story. That was the first page. So he's a very vile person, isn't he? He's a billionaire in Australia. He said there's no other alternative to nuclear power, except there is. It's not just geothermal either, but that's the best one. That's the most sensible one. That's the most simplest one. That's the most resource least option. That's the quickest one to implement. That's the smartest one, the best one, the most prolific. You don't have to bring coal, oil, gas, or nuclear. You don't have to get rid of waste. Just boil the water to your heart's content for the next 500,000 years. I say 500,000 because you can keep the same facility there, just replace parts as needed. But in 500,000 years, you'll have better technology again. Everybody will have a fuel rod up their arse and they won't need nothing. Aims to use X-rays to melt the rocks, repurpose coal and gas plants into deep geothermal wells. It's stupid simple, and they already exist. The technology is completely innocuous and benign. So when he claims it will take 10 years to get the first nuclear power plant going, so we can't delay, well, if you look at what's going on, this is 2021. In 2020, the global net increase in renewable was 261 gigawatts. It's the capacity of 300 nuclear power plants in 12 months coming online. So let's just underline the point. Renewable energy in 12 months, as is produced by all the existing nuclear power plants over 80 years. We have almost caught up to it in just 12 months. But in 24 months, we surpassed it. Because last year was 291 gigawatts. Saying it's too expensive to store energy for renewables is a garbage can diagnosis. Bugs to boost solar energy storage underground and soil batteries. How to store excess wind power underwater. You can do pumped hydro or water batteries where you have two reservoirs. And all this is the right thing to do. We're trying to come up with solutions. Nuclear is not a solution. Claim renewables are cheaper, he said, are not true, but he didn't provide any documentation to back up the claim. Oh, I did. So you can have compressed air pumped storage where you dig a bunch of mine shafts and you're only going to put 120 psi into them. And these projects already exist since 2011. That can't be good. Break out the Robitussin, Dana. That's how we got to this point tonight. Still got a little dry. Heck, I was sick for 21 days. Yikes. My apologies. I could have probably put up a little video for 30 seconds and done that discreetly. But I didn't, so sue me. Mr. Smith also rejected nuclear safety fears and pointed out 75% of France's electricity is derived through nuclear power. Half their fleet is down, stupid. It's just perpetual liars, eh? That's what they use. They only use people that tell perpetual lies. Half saying, the propaganda is over the top. Trying to pretend that 75% of France's electricity is coming from nuclear, when France is in desperation for the import electricity. France is going to build 6 more reactors, and they don't have the water for the reactors they got. Every argument they got for nuclear, there's dozens of counter-arguments that flatline their narratives. Not moving towards nuclear lead to higher temperatures. Again, that's what nuclear does. It pulses energy every second. It's a hard decision to make. The whole world needs to embrace nuclear power before it's too late. No, the whole world already embraced renewables. 260 gigawatts in 2020 and 291 gigawatts in 2021. And between 2020 and 2026, there are going to be over 4,800 gigawatts of renewables online in that 6-year period, according to the International Energy Agency, which unfortunately now has been captured by the United Nations. And Fate Breisel is now, ex-nuclear industry insider, is now in charge of the energy agency promoting nuclear. They're still not going to save nuclear because nuclear doesn't have the redeeming qualities. They don't have the manpower. They don't have the workforce. They don't even have they don't have a single person in the nuclear industry that the population is able to tolerate for more than a couple of seconds. They don't have anybody likable in the entire nuclear industry worldwide. That's not a public relation nightmare. What actually is? So there was over 600 nuclear power plants where the renewables came online in just 24 months. How can nuclear beat that? And if you pair it up with the endless storage that's available, and I mean endless storage available at your fingertips, there's over 20 different ways you can store it. Small-scale nuclear power an option for private sector. Again, this is madness to suggest something that doesn't exist and showing you pictures of nuclear power plants surrounded by farms. That's not evil at all. That's way levels and levels above evil. Like computers, in the past decade, nuclear power station becomes smaller and more affordable. This guy is crazy, by the way. You get a laugh at it. This is where for example, a mine will be able to generate its own power from a reactor that can fit on a truck. This is dirty bombs, incredible, dangerous, dirty bombs driving around on the back of trucks now. Shareholders in Scumbag X Energy, which is already building the type of reactor, which is not. It doesn't have a patent filed. It doesn't have paperwork filed with the non-regulatory agencies. It's a complete fabrication to say they're building that type of reactor. Decade or two at best. They've been at it for 20 years. In the future, communities, municipalities, and private companies can have their own nuclear power plant, Dana. Listen, you're full of shit. You're destroying everybody's future with a fable by misdirecting them away from coming up with solutions. Maybe able to purchase their own small modular reactor. And this is Mulder from X Energy, so you know this is just propaganda and overdrive, by the way. This made the firm with the Bill Gates Terror Power. Bill Gates has never been to Terror Power. He's never going to go to Terror Power. Bill Gates has nothing to do with it. They just use his name. It's like the Olympics, where you pay to use the Olympics in your advertisement. That's all it is. And then the American government threw money at it because it's nuclear. Not that much money at it. A small reactor's generation capacity by definition less than 400 megawatts and can be small as an 8 megawatt micro reactor can fit on a truck or even on a plane. Again, this is nonsense. Maybe you can do it, but it's still nonsense when you got so many better options. It's ludicrous, in fact, to suggest that you're going to be driving around in trucks and planes with these, and claiming that they're building them on top of that. The ultimate betrayal to claim that they're actually building them. A small nuclear power reactor costs about 1% to 2% of the traditional large older reactor, around $3 billion each, actually. Claiming they're going to cost 1 or 2%, again, they don't exist. You can't quantify an assertion when it doesn't even exist. Why are you speculating on something when there's so many solutions available? Yeah, let's spend decades developing something that might never come to fruition rather than coming up with solutions. That's the people that are in charge of your energy in your countries worldwide, refusing to come up with solutions and only looking at nuclear. Russia and China has been using small modular reactors for some time is a complete dishonest remark. It's not simply not true. So in order to sell the story, they got to tell you 25 lies each time. Russia accuses Ukrainian forces of 12 missile strikes. Yeah, because it's in the interest of Ukraine to have a radiological accident because the world is already on the edge of its seat waiting for it. And they show you this picture, but it's actually surrounded by farms. And surprise, 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 yeah? No. 6 missiles hit the spray pool. The spray pool. This is the cooling system. Another part of the cooling system, another 2 landed in the square of the dry storage of nuclear waste. If you hit any of these containers, you're going to pop them, for sure. And you probably already did. We don't know. Nobody knows. You're in a war zone. Major energy specialist criticizes Belgium's plan to phase out nuclear power. Again, right, he wrote a book on climate change. Claims he's the creator of the concept of carbon footprint, which is not true, right? That was BP Oil. Well, BP Oil populated it anyway, right? With a mass advertising campaign. And if he came up with the concept of carbon footprint, then you're a sack of shit. I'll be checking into that later. The desire to replace nuclear power with renewable energies mean replacing energy that's already decarbonized with other carbon-free energies. Again, without carbon, you can't have a single species on the planet. It's pollution, not carbon, that is the issue. And the only pollution that's really an issue explains Belgium and the rest of the world will be forced one way or another to give up on fossil fuel. All Western countries are part of globalization. It is not too late to act, but it's too late to avoid all the unpleasant consequences of what we already set in motion if we don't promote nuclear. Again, the nuclear industries is based upon deceit and dishonesty. Its entire legacy is predicated upon deceit and dishonesty. Renewable energy innovation. Leading companies in nuclear reactor cooling systems for the power industry. So, like, again, you see him attaching the word renewables to nuclear. This is a complete deceit. This is completely dishonest. Nuclear reactor cooling system, key innovation area in renewable energy. Nuclear reactor cooling system and renewable energy. Right, this disgusting. And they got the big players from the nuclear industries there, right? Babcock and Wilcock. These people designed the boiling water reactor designs. Like Fukushima. There's 70 of them in America. They put the reactor fuel pools on top of the buildings. The stupidest spot imaginable. They should be arrested and prosecuted for crimes against humanity, shouldn't they? France spent 8.4 billion euros to help companies with energy bills. So they put an embargo against Russia, and now they got to spend all the taxpayers' money to the companies that are struggling because of inflation that they created by an embargo against one of the few countries they can get their commodities from. Yeah, that makes a whole lot of sense. That's what that does. That's what you call idiots, isn't it? That's the definition of stupid. The unseen cost of switching to electric energy. Well, it's not cost. It's paid for by the people that are using the energy. There's plenty of money to go around. Your job is not to rob the ratepayers. Your job is to provide energy. If you can't do it, get out of the way. Let somebody else that can do it take that job. Instead, the industry takes the job, and they only promote nuclear. Blind mystic Baba Vaga's 2023 predictions include alien attack, thank goodness, and nuclear blackmail. From solar storms and nuclear disasters, she didn't hold back. She's a sire. She's predicting the future. So alien attacks and a solar tsunami. About friggin' time. If we have a solar flare coming from the sun that takes out the grid, all nuclear plants and fuel pools melt down within 1 week. Classy Thrasher signs the nuclear blast. Nuclear blast is the name of a label, nuclear blast. A nuclear blast is nothing, it's just disease factories, right? But that's the biggest label out there for thrash metal and heavy metal and the head-banging music. I used to love that when I was young. Don't know why, but like everybody else when you're young. Nuclear Blast record family. Well, they're going to release another album after 16 years by the looks of it. But the Nuclear Blast, right, there's a lot of that comes up. What was the name of that group there? And so the word nuclear gets promoted this way. Same as Spider-Man and the Hulk, and Superman. How to power the future? The answer is blowing in the wind. No, the answer is right under your feet. It's called geothermal energy. Wind and solar should be the backup at best to geothermal. To supplement it for storage maybe, right? To make it more efficient, but for peak hours or something, see? Scotland could face an influx of 19,000 wind turbines, but instead of just digging holes and tapping into geothermal. How many missiles does NATO have? NATO was created because of the Soviet Union. Right? So when the Soviet Union, stupid, was dissolved, instead of letting someone else fix the problem, the Soviet Union was very successful. Like their satellites, their space, their rockets, everything superseded America's and Russia, or China's and the rest of them. And then, when they dissolved, which a lot of people attribute to Chernobyl, when they dissolved the Soviet Union, you got rid of the pensions of the country too. So everybody ended up starving. It was a disaster, still is. So folks, CND anti-nuclear weapons protest at RAF, because NATO and America will store weapons in Britain. And that area is a notorious area to store the weapons. So they got together, bless their hearts. They chased them out of there a couple decades ago, I believe. And it'll make their area a target if you store nuclear weapons there. Yeah, 2008 were removed because of protests from this same group. Gotta like them, man. They're awesome. Success, eh? Oh, so the Hulk is about to become Marvel's newest king, the Hulk. Right? It was created by the nuclear industry. This caricature was created by the nuclear industry to brainwash the children in the increments to think a nuclear waste would make them into superheroes, same as Spider-Man, right? And many, many, many other of these bizarre heroes. The upcoming book continues the ongoing Hulk series, Hulk Planet. So there's a planet of Hulks in this one. Industry's not evil at all, is it? A Hulk-populated planet. That's what they want to do here. They want to turn everybody into Hulk and the Spider-Man with all the constant emissions from the nuclear site. Work your fingers to the bone. What do you get? Bony fingers. Well, I mean, this is almost 2 hours of lies we covered again tonight, and we can't cover them all. There's too many. Can't keep up with it. What does that tell you about nuclear? The whole populated planet that the Marvel hero. There's Guitar Hero. There's GoPro heroes. They got a hero for everything. Your grandparents and aunts and uncles can never be a hero to the grandkids again because they're replaced by these fables from the industry, from the propaganda lobbyist machine. Which is very dangerous, right? That's a very dangerous thing to do. It disconnects the family bond. Accidentally helped evolve by sending a massive amount of gamma radiation its way, created an entire planet of hulks. Like, why take that job, see? To write stuff like that and produce stuff like that. Because that's the definition of... there's so many other jobs they could have done. They got incredible talent. Why take all the talent they got and use it to damage the population of the planet so the nuclear industry can pretend it has some redeeming qualities for another year or two? And when you look at the artwork, you can see the skill goes into it. The Planet of the Apes and Hulk. Never saw that one coming, by the way. The Hulk, always the Hulk. The Hulk is this, the Hulk is that. Got all kinds of sinister eyes in the background. Big pointy teeth. No lips. Because that's perfect depiction of the nuclear industry, isn't it? The series turned the hero into the king of the planet full of other Hulks from a gamma ray burst. That's propaganda in serious overdrive. For another example of Hulk's prior sovereignty. Superhero, comic book superheroes got sovereignty. You'll never have it. The Titan persona has taken over Banner's body, both in human Hulk form, causing him to commit violent acts, which is the nuclear industry, such as murdering a bar full of people or a planet, and later a number of Hulks on an alternate Earth. And you can't even... Bikini Island, they polluted the shit out of that. It's over 1 million square kilometers. It's too radioactive to live. Constipated Party 27 is the dystopian nightmare. That's the new Prime Minister of United Kingdom. With Rupert Murdoch, a reporter, in a miniskirt. On a private plane coming back from... with his cookies and cream. Now, who the frig is he? Who the hell is this guy? Sunak. I take it a load of this. He was educated at Winchester College, studied philosophy, politics, economics at Lincoln College, Oxford, earned an MBA from Stanford University, USA. So he's a Manchurian candidate. As a Fulbright scholar, and while at Stanford, he met his future wife, the daughter of an Indian billionaire. And guess who she works for? You guessed it, United Nations. He worked for Goldman Sachs, and she works for United Nations Global Fund for Education and Emergencies. That's Manchurian candidate as you get, man. And he's only been in politics since 2015. No experience, really, when you think about it, right? But he's connected. And so is his wife. I can't tell the difference. Can you tell the difference? I can't tell the difference. Where to? Where's the poll to? Here, let's bring that up. Are dirty, despicable, disgusting, vicious, hateful nuclear power plants, also known as disease factories, because there's 1,800 diseases from nuclear fallout, killing Earth's species and humanity? And 96% of the people, 55 votes. I know somebody accidentally voted yes earlier, so it's even less no's and more yeses. It's a great poll. We appreciate participation in the poll tonight. I barely got any views yesterday. Yeah, that's Dana Nasana has one of those shirts with that on it, which really tells the story, don't it? There's a pot-strained Bruce Banner. I'm not surprised at all, of course. The industry loves going after the younger people on top of that, so it was an exhausting show today. We raised 130 from James Lusa last night. Thank you, James. We've been online for 2 hours, almost 10 minutes. It's 7 minutes after midnight. Well, we're still alive. We're back tomorrow night. Curb stomp. We'll curb stomp the nuclear industry again tomorrow night. Looking forward to it. Hope everybody's doing good. Savannah's Fort accidentally hit the no button instead of yes. Hello, everybody. Read everybody's comments after. I'll just end it here. 2 hours, 10 minutes. Oh, I'm actually hurting here tonight. There's a lot, so much work to do a full show. It's easy to take shortcuts, but what's the point, right? You got to tell the story. You might never get another chance. There's no shortcuts in being honest, right? And in order to make sure there's no way to misrepresent what I'm saying, I provide the documentation for as much as I can. But it's overwhelming, though, each day in a 24-hour period. It's overwhelming. But once again, a full show of just lies from the last 24 hours of the media manipulating the entire planet in order to make sure they don't have a future. Because that's what the lies from the industry is about, making sure the species and humanity doesn't have a future. And that's why we had the poll that we had tonight, because that clearly shows sedition against the entire planet and a wanton disregard and disrespect of all species. Thanks for everybody. See everybody on the other side tomorrow night. Take care, folks. God bless everybody. And hugs for everybody. We'll see everybody soon enough. Because nuclear is not going to stop lying tomorrow. But it will at some point. The world will push back at some point, right? Have a great night, everybody. Take care. Made it this far, don't forget to give us a thumbs up if you can. It might not work, but give it a try. Good night, everybody. Take care.